Thanks, Dave. So as Dave explained, I've just recently returned from my Nuffield scholarship, and what an amazing experience it was. So thank you, first of all, to Nuffield for giving me such an amazing opportunity. Now, I went over on my Nuffield scholarship to travel to investigate mixed farming, so the interaction of livestock and cropping, which is a real passion of mine. But it's not exactly what I found, and in fact, when I travelled overseas, I really found absolutely no mixed farming at all. And the only place we really do it is in Australia, maybe Argentina and a few other places. What I did find was this next guy. I'll do this. Now this is Tim Richter. A few Nuffield scholars that know Tim. And here we are in a paddock of triple stack GM corn. And this for me was a very pivotal point in my Nuffield scholarship. Now who would have thought the big fella could be so inspiring? And I only say that because I know he's going to be on YouTube and I'll be emailing him. But you know, so Tim introduced me to a new way of thinking about agriculture. Now, that morning prior to going and seeing Tim, I'd visited Professor Matt Lieberham at the Iowa State University, and Matt was kind of really, while I was going there, and I was just sort of bumming at Tim's place because I needed a bit of a rest. And so Tim was taking me through all the trials, and he was doing rotations of conventional corn with oats and alfalfa and beans, trying to find a more sustainable system for the soils, the agriculture, a more diverse system. And if you've ever been to Iowa, there is no diversity. All you see is corn. So I was quite happy with that, because that's pretty much in keeping with my Nuffield scholarship, and then of course I ended up at Tim's. So Tim, this is a paddock of Tim's. It's been in corn now for 25 years. This will be its 26th year going in. And Tim quite openly admits that by growing GM corn continuously 25 years, he gets a 10% yield penalty. But what we all seem to miss in this is that triple stack corn, GM corn, is so reliable. Every year it grows with very little input, year after year after year. And in the last 7 years, not one year has yielded less than the last. And so, regardless of how good the science is about rotation and diversity in their system, and given he's only 25 miles from an ethanol plant, in their system, his lowest risk is just to keep on growing corn continuously. It also provided a huge opportunity by adopting of GM, because what it allows him to do is effectively grow 30% more corn and have no more labour, no more machinery, just 30% outright. So you can be really aggressive in the market and chasing resources and land. So what does this mean after visiting Tim and then coming home? Well, when I was swanning around in Brazil on my first trip, my wife was very busy at home taking control of the farm and did a very good job. So she sort of got a bit of rain in March and whacked in this canola crop. Now I thought, from what I've seen around the world, we should look into a bit of grazing, and we started grazing the canola. Well, this is the result at the end of the year. So we've grazed the canola. The difference in the yield between those two crops was almost nothing. So by grazing our crops, we found out that very soon that by increasing the diversity of our operations, we're decreasing our risk because we're lowering the risk in our livestock enterprise. We're also lowering the risk in our cropping enterprise because we've got two in there. So diversity, decreasing risk, and increasing opportunity. And really where the opportunity for me came is that this year coming, I now have the confidence that I'm going to graze nearly all of my crops. In fact, 50% of my canola will be GM. It allows me greater weed control with the grazing, because one of the downsides of grazing is decreased weed control. So GM's going to provide me with a simpler system, and the results out of a drought in WA this year say that GM canola outperformed all canola this year in a drought. So again, much the same as Tim, simple system, risk control. It's allowing me greater flexibility, more opportunities, and another diversity to already what is a diverse farming system. So Matt's not wrong. Professor Matt Lieberham isn't wrong in what he's saying about diversity and trying to do everything right, but underlying all of this is that as good as research is, farmers are always going to drive risk down, to create more opportunity, to create more opportunities, to create more income, because that is essentially what we're all about. So essentially, a future in farming for me is about decreasing risk through diversification and at the same time increasing more opportunities to derive more income. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And if I'm going to whisk through, fasten your seatbelts, because I'm going to do a really quick whisk through a few, what I call sort of big look at R&D improvements in the grazing industries of the future. And I'll probably raise more questions than I answer. And I wanted to start with what we feel and we mean when we talk about transformational research and development. You probably don't think of Lucin as a transformational technology. A recent qualitative research in Western Australia by Wilkinson and Doling show that there's a vast difference between adopting Lucin in a niche use on a farm, mopping up a bit of extra water and controlling salinity, to using the multiple benefits of this marvellous perennial legume. So if you think about filling feed gaps, improving soil fertility and crop rotations, meeting market specifications for prime lambs and cattle, and maybe the benefits of fodder conservation for supplementary feeding in another season. Lucin is quite a complex technology to adopt across a whole farming system. So this is a simple to the complex, and we really need to understand the adoption of complex technologies for the future. Well, I've gone to Rob Warburton. Oh golly, sorry guys. I'll go back here. No, my fingers. So this is my metaphor for transformational research and development. And when you look at what has happened with the adoption of conservation tillage over 35 years, the people investing in those technologies in the 1970s, they didn't know where they were going to get to, but they probably had a vision. As an investor, and I think of in my role as a board member of Meat and Livestock Australia, if you're investing back there in the beginning, it's a bit scary because you've got to have a leap of faith, but you need to have a big picture of where you're going. I think the thing that we often see in crowded rooms when policymakers are talking about this adoption time lag is when people talk about the adoption of a technology like they discovered it in 1970 and finally somebody adopted it in 2010. And of course it's not like that. This graph is made up of multiple technologies. It's made up of the application of chemicals to control weeds. Then we had the short wheat varieties. Then we came in with some fantastic stuff about technology in machinery, GPS, followed by controlled traffic technology, and recently the inter-row cropping. And finally, these days, with this variable rate technology for the precise use of moisture and fertility in the soil across a paddock, so using GPS. Wilkinson and Doling describe the four characteristics of complex innovations. The first one is that not only is it difficult to use and understand, but it also has a degree of indivisibility, so that it may lack a bit of flexibility, and it may require a cultural change in the business into which it's introduced. When I look at my industries, the red meat industries, I think the best example of transformation is what's happened when we've transformed the fat lamb industry to the prime lamb industry. And if I look at that graph, I'd say, well, where are we now? I ran this through a group of people in New South Wales last week. I was asked to do a keynote for New South Wales I&I, and we thought we might have been about 1998. So we're about 50% of the way there, and that might give us some really good indications of what we need to do to continue that adoption and to really reap the benefits of our investments in lamb plan, in bringing in new breeds from South Africa, in the development of composite breeds. Professor James Rowe at the Sheep CRC talks about instant gratification, which is the results feeding into the lamb plan analysis system every fortnight. And there's a whole lot of stuff that contributes to that. I'm talking too much. I talk about the big four, and in my big four, I start with genetics because the advantages of genetic improvement programs, if they're well run, are cumulative and permanent. And so if we can get that right in our industry, and I'm talking about across, I guess, our livestock industries, then we'll make some serious gains. The second big area is feed-based and soils. When I think about what we need to do to improve our grazing system management, our interaction between pastures and soils, our use of native and introduced herbaceous perennials, and woody perennials in our farming systems, then we have a ways to go. I think we're back at about 1978. We have a program called Evergraze. Oh my Lord, I'm running behind time. We have a program called Evergraze, which is in its early stages, but some really interesting perennial plant development happening. And the final one is animal health and welfare. But no, there's more. In a recent paper published on the DISA website last April, Professor Danny Sampson from Melbourne University talks about conscious competence, about how companies actually innovate, how they get innovation into their DNA. And I'd urge you all to read this paper. It's really fascinating. He talks about mature industries, about innovation in not only the big end of town like Newcrest and Microsoft, but also small SMEs, small family companies, and how they've introduced in innovation and they've got their staff hooked into it. It requires a number of, he talks about a number of characteristics that we need. We need strong leadership. We need strong determined leadership. It'll be different for every company or farm, and it needs to have a value creation along the supply chain. When I was at university, I had a lecturer in agricultural economics. People here who are a bit older, my age and older, will remember Dr. Bruce Davison, who wrote The Northern Myth, and he used to say there are 3 ways to get on the land: patrimony, matrimony and parsimony. Now, the younger people in the audience won't know what patrimony is, but that's, you know, when the oldest son inherits a farm. I'd like to think that these days we've moved to an era where the well-equipped, the knowledgeable, the people who are using the best information coming out of our R&D are in a position to make good evidence-based decisions. And I call that a testimony to our hegemony. Thank you.